We've discussed Joe Burrow's risk quite a bit throughout this offseason program, and it is one of the biggest questions facing the Bengals offense, but it's not the only question. It may not be the most important question. Let's break those all down today.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, available on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts, covering your team every day. And today we dive into some of the biggest questions facing this Bengals offense in the 2024 season. We've talked a lot about Joe Burrow's wrists, and that will be part of the focus of today's show, but it is more than that. We're also going to talk about why special teams is a bigger question than it has been for quite a while. And a lot of that goes back to rule changes. Today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. You can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet at FanDuel.com/locked on. James, what do you think the biggest question is facing this Bengals offense this year?
Well, it obviously starts with Joe Burrow's health and will he be 100%? And we've spent a ton of time talking about that and we'll continue to. Obviously, this week, the Bengals back at practice. And so we'll have time to discuss that and how he looks and all of those things. But after that, it's, well, an offense that's going to look different. But let's just look at the facts here. No Brian Callahan. Dan Pitchers, the new offensive coordinator. Tyler Boyd has been here for 8 seasons. Well, now he's with Brian Callahan in Tennessee. You don't have Joe Mixon, who was in town over the weekend for his camp with Jamar Chase. And for the first time since 2016, he was drafted in 2017, has been a big part of the backfield. So my initial thought is obviously Burrow's health. But this offense is going to look different, feel different, even if the plays are the exact same. And I'm not saying that we expect them to be. Obviously, have a new offensive coordinator. It's going to impact things. But even if they're the exact same, the players are a bit different. And so that's going to impact all of the above. So I think the biggest question is on a 50,000-foot view, and we can break it down and get into more detail, but it's how does it look without an offensive coordinator that clearly settled in and was doing a good job and a really good job at times here for 5 seasons. And then obviously Joe Mixon and Tyler Boyd were two staples of the organization for many, many years.
Yeah, I think just starting with the Joe Burrow question, just to clarify it, it's one, let's make sure that he is 100%. Let's see that. Let's see that proof against other teams when it's real football, full speed football. We're not going to get that answer for quite some time. And I think that is really the question around Burrow. We've seen him managing his health more aggressively in the offseason program. You've mentioned him taking sessions off or periods off, I should say, in practices that have been open to the media. He potentially decided to take a rest day or they decided to give him a rest day on Thursday last week as OTAs went on. And that's something that he talked about quite a bit, is not pushing himself and reflecting on the calf and thinking about how he's managing the return with this wrist injury, is taking that step and maturing and getting himself to the season healthy and not taking those extra effort plays where you're a little bit sore, maybe you don't need to. But if you get to the season healthy, I don't think that we have lingering question beyond that for Joe Burrow. It's outside of that, does he continue on the trajectory he's been on, which is when he's healthy, playing quarterback at a top 2 to 3 level in the NFL, depending on the week, depending on the opposition, and continuing to improve his game year over year in discrete ways, like taking fewer sacks or getting better on the run or adapting to the way teams are taking away what has made the Bengals good year over year as defenses continue to try to take things away from one of the more effective offenses in the league when Joe Burrow's been healthy over the last 3 to 4 years. So we've seen that from him. I don't think that those are questions. The question really is as simple as, is he who we think he is? And we won't get that answer, like I said, I think, until the regular season in full.
For sure. I think that will linger for sure. And whether or not we see him, I don't think we're going to see him a bunch in the preseason regardless. Will we see him a little bit? We'll start to get those answers, but really until they go up against the New England Patriots on September 8th, there'll be some kind of question about Joe Burrow, about his health, about how he's progressing, how he's feeling. It'll be a storyline, and it should be. It helped shape last year's season when he went down. And I'm not even talking about Bengals wise. I'm talking about in the NFL. It impacted obviously the Ravens, obviously the Bengals, but the entire AFC playoff race. So when you have someone that has that kind of impact, the health factor is going to be a story. And when he goes out there and plays at the level that I think he will still be able to play at, then that answer will be done and part of the past. Until then, it's still going to be a question and will be asked plenty of times between now and the start of the regular season.
Yeah, we'll hear it in the pregame show in week 1. If you're watching that, you'll hear it when the offense goes onto the field for the first time. Whoever's announcing that game is, oh, here's Joe Burrow for the first time since that wrist injury. You can already, that's like really easy.
The Baltimore game on the road is going to be a big one where it's talked about a ton. Week 10, it'll still be talked about. So,
but as you mentioned, when I asked you what you think the biggest question is, and I agree with you, I don't know that it is Joe Burrow. I think that that's the most important question, but I don't have a ton of doubts there right now. There's no real reason to think that he won't answer that question affirmatively and that you'll get back to the Burrow you're expecting. And then beyond that for Burrow, it's like, do you continue to manage your hit and sack avoidance? And does that continue to trend in the right direction? Does all the work that he's put in to the athleticism and throwing off platform and getting a little bit bigger, how do those things play out for him as a football player? Does that add a little wrinkle to his game? I think those are more interesting questions than just the health question, but the health question is the biggest one. But for him, when you think about outside of Burrow, how does the addition of Justin Riscotti to this offense lead to, and the incorporation of new ideas, get into the mix when you've got a new offensive coordinator in Dan Pitcher? You have two major changes in the architecture of this Bengals offense this year. And one of them is obviously the promotion of Dan Pitcher, and he's going to have different ideas from Brian Callahan, and he's been involved in the offense in all these ways. So maybe those are subtle changes, but then they specifically go out of their way to bring in Justin Riscotti. And maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill here, James. You tell me what you think. But they specifically go out of their way to bring this guy in who's got offensive line experience and quarterback experience from a system that has emphasized a star receiver, Justin Jefferson. And when Zach Taylor talks about the hire, he's talking about, I do want to bring new ideas in. It is important for us to get that fresh perspective and to bring that in from time to time. And when he talked about the hire with Dan Horde back in March or whenever they talked, it was like, we didn't need to make this hire, but it's something that we were thinking about doing. And we went through our list and we found this to be a really good fit. And I don't think that's just lip service. I think there's potentially something there. What do you think?
Sure. I agree. I think they know that they need to evolve, and the self-awareness to know that is certainly a really good thing, because this team offensively throughout this run has not been consistent enough. And by this run, I mean the past 3 years. They have not been consistent enough. It wasn't just last year with the calf. It wasn't just that first year when the offensive line was just so bad that they couldn't function and they started the Super Bowl with a bunch of guys that aren't in the league anymore. It's not just that. There's a ton of things. And so I think they looked at it and they're like, all right, how do we evolve? And let's continue the Bengals conversation and try to answer that, how they could potentially evolve, coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA Finals are almost here. Winner take all time. You got the Celtics, you got the Mavericks. Right now, the Mavericks are plus 188. The Celtics heavy favorites plus 225. Got to be honest with you, Jake. I like the Mavericks. I'm not sure I like them enough to take them over the Celtics. It really comes down to health, Kristaps Porzingis. But maybe you think that the Mavericks are going to handle business, pull off the upset, or the Celtics are finally going to get a ring after going to a bunch of Eastern Conference finals over the years. Well, you got to get to FanDuel today, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So throw $5 on the Mavs to win the series, throw $5 on the Celtics, throw $5 on game one. And who you think will win game one of the NBA finals later this week. Or maybe you want to throw $5 on the Reds as they try to dig themselves out of the hole that they are in, or the NHL playoffs. The point is you can get in on all the action with FanDuel. And with any winning $5 bet, you're going to get $150 in bonus bets by going to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
You talk about the need for this team to evolve, to become more consistent. You think about where the offense has been over the last 3 years, and we've generally praised the offensive staff for finding ways to adapt. We've praised Joe Burrow for his ability to play quarterback at a high level. We've also talked about certain deficiencies. One of those most recently being the reluctance to get under center. That one certainly a hot topic, and run under center, play action, run more of their offense from under center, which we thought was going to be a bigger emphasis last year based on the offseason program until Joe Burrow had that calf injury. But this is a team that has not been the bleeding edge of NFL offense innovation, really at any point. They've been really good at refining. They've been really good at adapting and finding the things that work for them. But they are not the Miami Dolphins in terms of trying new things. They're not the San Francisco 49ers and Kyle Shanahan in terms of trying new things on offense, at least to a significant degree, to a consistent degree. They're not pushing the NFL forward. And while teams certainly are copying things the Bengals do, it's less frequent than perhaps other teams. And I don't necessarily expect that to change a ton, but there are options and avenues they could take to be more multiple. And I think I'll go back to Riscotti's name and the potential impact he could have there and the influence he could have there. And they could be more consistent, like you said. And that comes back to not just Joe Burrow in the passing game. That brings the focus back to execution in the running game, consistency in the running game, consistency in executing blocks on the offensive line, and this number of factors that just and for the running backs, this number of factors that just hasn't quite been where you want it to be. Even when Joe Burrow is playing great, that they would have these flash games where everything would go great, and then there would be games where we would be questioning where that level of team was.
Yeah, and that's why, like, honestly, there's so many, I would say, national pundits that doubt or have their questions when like it's ranking season. And so all these rankings come out, and some are probably right. Some of them are way off, and people react to them. And part of it is that consistency. And when I think of the Bengals and like the missing piece of this offense, it's a couple of things. They've never really had a consistent run game, and that doesn't mean a consistent run game doesn't mean you need to run the ball 40 times. And I think a lot of people think that, but they haven't really had that during this window. So could you do that? Can you be efficient on the ground and also be explosive? But it's that word. This offense, when it's at its best, is explosive. And I think Joe Burrow is smart enough to be able to find the right plays, get in the right looks, all of those things, to keep the offense on the field if they have to go 15 plays. But it's really, really hard to do that. It just is. And so can they find ways to produce explosive plays outside of Burrow to Jamar, or Jamar breaking one, or the occasional Higgins deep ball? And we didn't see a ton of those last year. They need more of that. And I think that's, however that is, everyone focuses on the more in-depth, all right, well, play action or this or that. They need more explosive plays this year, period. They talked about it a year ago. Remember that? It was like, oh, we need to be more explosive. And it just did not happen. For whatever reason, it did not happen. Well, there are some new pieces around, and they need to find a way to put those pieces in position to make explosive plays, whether it's the wide receivers, whether it's the running backs. Obviously, we're talking about Joe Burrow, the offensive line, the entire offense.
Yeah, I think that a big part of that is, do they have the personnel
Yeah.
that unlocks it? Because last year, their only explosive player on offense until a screen pass to Chase Brown made him the second fastest ball carrier in the NFL late in the season was Jamar Chase. They add Jermaine Burton. You get hopefully some progress from Charlie Jones. You get more involvement in the offense from Chase Brown. You add Mike Gesicki, who, while he's not the most explosive tight end in the NFL, he does offer you the size to compete a little bit more on seams and in the middle of the field, in the intermediate to deep part of the field, when you have T. Higgins and Jamar Chase outside, and maybe Jermaine Burton also threatening outside for vertical stuff that every offense runs in the NFL. And maybe you feel a little bit better about the tight end part of that for vertical play with Mike Gesicki running the seam. The question is, how do they get there? Do they have the guys to do it, and do they put them in the position to do it? There's a lot of hand wringing, I think, over, why can't they find a way to find the explosive play last year? And a lot of that was directed at the coaching staff, and some of that certainly applicable to the coaching staff and to the quarterback, I think, and getting into the right looks and taking the shots at the right times. We, I think, highlighted in a couple film episodes last year just to show that it's not only the coach's fault. A couple of alerts where Joe Burrow could have thrown a post and just chose not to, or one that he did throw, or I think it was him, unless it was Browning, to Charlie Jones, one that Charlie Jones didn't run all the way through. And so there are these missed deep opportunities as well for the team last year. But the hope would have to be that increasing involvement for some of these explosive, fast, speedy players they've added over the last couple of years can translate and make it easier to find the explosive play, because defenses will continue to make it harder than ever to find just free vertical balls, one-on-one shots. That's just a huge point of emphasis for NFL defenses right now. So it's finding the opportunities and having the personnel to stress teams enough that you can find those plays, and figuring out how to adapt your offense. Maybe it's not just vertical stuff anymore. You can't just run 9-8-9 3 times a game and hit on the deep balls on the sidelines all the time. You got to find other ways to do it, stretching the field horizontally, using deep crossers and these sorts of things that we don't see the Bengals offense do a ton of, or those bigger parts of the game. That's part of the question. Maybe it's part of the answer, but the question of how the offense tries to find more explosive plays and how effective they are in doing so is certainly a big question for this season.
No doubt. And that's how they can make the leap. I think they have the right quarterback, the right play caller, the right offense. And if you have those, you mix in those explosive plays, you're going to look up and we're going to be talking about one of the most productive offenses, one of the most consistent offenses in the NFL. And they have to be more multiple. I think they know that. I think that's part of the evolution. And that's a huge question, is one, how different it looks and feels this year. And two, does it work to the level that they're hoping it does from an explosive play standpoint? And if the answer is yes to that, then how it looks and feels is likely going to be positive, and the fans are likely going to be excited about the end result. So it goes hand in hand for sure. But with this offense, I almost always go back to those explosive plays, because when they do get stagnant, when they do get inconsistent and they do struggle, it's because it feels like they're playing in a 10 by 10 sandbox, and they need to be able to get out of that. And so we'll see if they can.
Yeah, and anytime a team has to consistently go 12 to 15 plays to score points, it's always hard to do on a consistent basis. You see defensive coordinators try to impose that on offenses in the NFL, and when you fall into that trap and that's how you have to win, the really good offenses can still do that, but it's much, much harder than finding the additional explosive play. Let's wrap up on the offense with some simple questions on the offensive line, and make sure we get to special teams as well here before we get to defense in our next episode. We'll go to those topics coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the app you need to download right now. Well, so you're ready to go, whether it's Bengals tickets and, as Joe Burrow reminded everyone on Instagram, TikTok, the clock is ticking. The regular season just about 3 months away. And Game Time is the place you should go for tickets to all of your live events that you're looking to go to this summer, whether it's NFL games, whether it's the NBA finals. If you want to make your way down to Dallas, I have a feeling that there could be some Bengals that watch the NBA finals in person. We'll see if that actually happens. But Game Time is where you should go to get your tickets. They have flash deals, zone deals, where you can get last minute tickets if you're making that decision to go to the Reds game on the Banks and you're like, yeah, I want to go. Well, download Game Time, get the tickets. It's easy. You can see views from your seat, so you know exactly what you're getting. They have all-in prices, so there's no hidden fees that are going to take you by surprise. And right now, you're going to get $20 off your first purchase by downloading the Game Time app, creating an account, and using code LOCKEDONNFL. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
I think the last simple question we need to ask of this offense is, what version of the offensive line shows up? Struggled out of the gates last year at a number of spots. Orlando Brown was dealing with injury all year. What do they get out of their right tackle addition? Trent Brown, how healthy does he make it through the year? What level does he bring as a pass protector, where we are expecting him to be a better pass protector than they've had at that spot? But we've also had that expectation for a few years now, and those expectations have been let down. Does Amarius Mims end up getting onto the field early and often? And how ready is he to go? What kind of step do they get from Cordell Volson? Does Alex Kappa rebound? Is Ted Karras still the veteran, consistent presence that he is, that he's been expected to be at center for the last few years? Some of those questions have simpler answers than others, but it wouldn't be a Cincinnati Bengals questions show if we didn't talk about the offensive line, at least to present the simple question of, will they be a little bit better and a little bit more consistent than they were in 2023?
And that's a big part when you think of everything we've discussed to this point. How much can they evolve given this offensive line? I think part of the reason they played the way they've played is because of their offensive line, because they know that, this offensive line might not be great at run blocking, and getting the ball in Joe Burrow's hands and having him do his thing is our best chance of winning. And I'm going all the way back to 2020 for Joe's rookie year early on in that season, when that certainly felt like the logic, even though it was a flawed roster. And so, this year, are they good enough to where you can uncover part of the playbook that you haven't really been able to uncover? Will Trent Brown help unlock this team from a pass blocking standpoint to where they can hold up against the Cleveland Browns and that pass rush, against some of these other pass rushes that really match up well against the Bengals and what they want to do on offense? And hopefully the answer is yes, right? And then you say, and will they be good enough run blockers to make teams respect the run game? And so you hope they are able to do both of those things. I think Trent Brown's capable. I think Orlando Brown Jr. is going to have a heck of a year. Ted Karras is in a contract year, plenty to prove there. Alex Kappa in line for a bounce back, you hope, because he was inconsistent last year. And then Cordell Volson, you obviously hope he continues to grow and gets picks up where he left off at the end of last season and gets better and can take another step or two this year. So I like their offensive line. I don't think it's the best offensive line in the league, but it's the best offensive line that Joe Burrow's had. And that doesn't even include, you mentioned Amarius Mims. It doesn't even include him, who I think he's coming along quite nicely. And Frank Pollock loves working with him, which is a really good sign. And there's no reason why he can't contribute if called upon this year.
Yeah, as the questions expand when we get closer to training camp and we talk about all the different questions in training camp and all the roster battles in training camp, and we spend an entire episode on the offensive line and we talk a lot about the depth battles there, we'll have more time to get into that. We'll have more time to get into the running back conversation, which we keep bringing up and teasing for a future episode because it will come up in the future. But right now it's, how do they use Zach Moss? How do they use Chase Brown? How do those guys fit together? Do they have all the pieces they need in that running back room? And part of that answer, I think, is a segue to the last question of the show relating to special teams, where we know what Evan McPherson is. And the biggest question around Evan McPherson is, will they extend him? But outside of that, and I think Cal Adamitis, actually, we know exactly who they've got in Cal Adamitis. He's going to be the long snapper. I think he's got no competition, no questions there. True competition at punter, where the Bengals bring in competition for Brad Robbins after a disappointing rookie year. And Darrin Simmons has called it disappointing. That's not just me saying that. That's not just you saying that. And the return of the kickoff return being a play that goes from, maybe you get 5 a year to you're going to have 80 plus kickoff returns a year for every team. And the way that impacts the roster, do the Bengals have an adequate kickoff returner? Have they done enough to prepare for the rule change there, where you look at other teams around the NFL and even in the division, with the Pittsburgh Steelers adding Cordero Patterson, the Bills adding Tariq Cohen? There's the Bills, right?
Mm-hmm.
Teams
Oh, no,
addressing the Jets. One of those New York teams. Teams taking steps to try to get better at that position, where the Bengals are like, okay, we'll see if Charlie Jones can contribute there. And you hope he can, right? You hope the answer is on the roster. Chris Evans, we talked about that being an opportunity for him to stick on the roster. Travion Williams will have a chance to reprise his duties there. And we'll see who else plays in. But some big questions on special teams face this team this year at both the punter position and the kickoff return position, where teams are even getting crazy talking about using position players on kickoffs, and we'll see if the Bengals explore that or not. But some interesting things happening in the special teams world this year, more so than we've seen for a while with the kickoff rule change.
Yeah, and it really is going to impact this roster. You look at it, and who emerges there? Who can do it? Is it someone we're missing? And obviously, going into camp, like you said, we'll have this discussion. But from a kickoff standpoint, I mean, all of these, really, if you're an undrafted guy, you're a late round guy, I find a way to make an impact on special teams, because it's going to be so heightened. It's been the play, Jake, where I'll be honest, when I'm at games, and this is a lot of people watching this, bathroom break. You better get your bathroom break in now. Like, if there's 8 minutes to go in the fourth, I'm getting ready to go downstairs. Someone scores. All right, bathroom break, come back and get ready to go down to the locker room and get ready for post game. Like, that's what kickoffs have been. And so now, obviously, we're going to have to be paying closer attention, but just the strategy behind it and which teams can be ahead and not behind from a strategy standpoint. It's so easy to be like, all right, well, we're going to go sign this guy. And by the way, I love the Cordero Patterson signing. Good for the Steelers for doing that. He's a really good returner still, I believe. So will these teams get that right? Or will the Bengals look at it and say, okay, well, you know what? We have this Cole Burgess kid who's an elite athlete, and yeah, he wasn't going to be able to make the team as a wide receiver, but now he has a chance because he could be a factor on kickoffs in multiple ways on both sides of it, when we're kicking off and when we're returning. Who knows? And I'm just throwing his name out there because that's someone that could be under the radar. We haven't really talked about him for obvious reasons. So I do think that it's going to be a huge factor. And then obviously the punter competition it's going to be, honestly, I think we're going to spend way more time on that during camp than some may realize, because it's going to be one of the biggest position battles of training camp, and a topic that a lot of people are wondering about. And we'll see if Brad Robbins can rebound after a rough year one, like you mentioned, and Austin McNamara is here to take his job. So we'll see what happens.
Gonna need to find a stopwatch for camp this year for the punter battles. But
I'll order one. I'm gonna go on Amazon right now. I'll order one. I'll send it to you. Canada. Is Amazon in your part of Canada? I don't even know if it would work, but
yes. What? Of course.
You're on an island, bro. How do they get stuff to you?
Big island.
Ferry?
How do they get stuff to people in Hawaii?
No, I know, but I'm just saying, like, it. Yeah. Okay.
We do have
You took it
planes.
way too literal. All right, digital stopwatch timer. That one's too cheap.
There we go. I do think,
4 out of
though,
5 stars. We need 5-star stopwatches. Go ahead, Jake.
I do think the kickoff return is really interesting. And it's a big question for me personally is to see how that play works out in the NFL this year, because it is a significant change that should push starting field position in a big way. And it'll be great to see if there are teams that really make that into a weapon again, because it used to be such an important part of the game, such a game changing part of the game. And for that to return, you want to make sure you're ready for it. And Darrin Simmons has been doing this job for a long time. He's been involved with the rule change and all these things. So you would hope that he's ready to go for that. And he's got his team ready to go for that. And he's got a good plan for that. But I do think it is a question, not just for the Bengals, but for every NFL team. And it really ties directly into the offense, because maybe that's a Chase Brown job. And it sets up the offense directly in so many ways at so many crucial junctures of football games that I think that it would be a little silly to not bring it up as a big question heading into this season.
Amarius Mims as the kicker. He
Weird.
just boots the ball. What do you think?
Well, you got to keep it.
No, it's straight up in the air. Like he just boots the moonshot.
Well, I would hope that Evan McPherson could do that better as a specialist than
Yeah, but
Amarius.
then he has to make the tackle. That's
Yeah.
the obviously Mims isn't the one you're taking there.
So if you're looking for a job for Dax Hill, it's kicking
Don't
off.
do that. God. I would try him on returns.
We're trying to find work for you, Dax.
He's an elite athlete. Why can't he catch and
don't
field
know.
a kickoff and run? Of course he can.
That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. We will discuss some of the questions on the defensive side of the ball before we get another OTA practice to react to this week. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.